The morning she signed the paper, there was snow on the ground, and her father's boots were still by the door. Laurel Voss, no, that name was in the file. She caught herself and kept moving. Let me write this properly. The morning she signed the paper, there was snow on the ground, and her father's boots were still by the door. Sable didn't move them. She stepped around them the way she had for 3 weeks, the way her mother did, the way her younger brother Finn did, all of them pretending the boots meant something other than what they meant. That Chester Drummond had gone to bed one Thursday night in November and not woken up, and that the boots by the door were just boots now, and the ranch was just land, and the land had a lien on it that came due in 30 days. She was 24 years old, and she did not know what a lien was until the banker from Harwick came out to explain it to her personally. His name was Mr. Tully. He wore a coat that was too clean for the ride out, and he held his hat in his hands the entire time he talked, which she supposed was meant to seem respectful. He told her that her father had borrowed against the North acreage 2 years prior. He told her the sum. He told her the date. She didn't say anything for a long time after he finished. "There are options," Mr. Tully said. "I'm sure there are," she said. He left a card. She put it on the kitchen table and looked at it for 4 days before she picked it up again. The option he hadn't mentioned out loud, the one she read about in the single folded paper he'd left beneath the card, was that a man named Corwin Shale had already purchased the debt. Not the bank. The bank had sold it, and Corwin Shale, who owned the Shale Creek operation 20 miles north and who had been trying to acquire the Drummond North acreage for 6 years, had sent word through Mr. Tully that he was willing to forgive the debt entirely, in exchange for her hand in marriage. She read that sentence twice. Then she set the paper down and went outside and stood in the cold for a while without her coat on, because the cold was the only thing that felt like it was telling the truth. Her mother, Ida, was inside. Ida had not gotten out of bed for most of those 3 weeks, and the doctor from town had said it was grief and also her heart, and that the two things were not entirely separate. Finn was 16 and trying very hard to act like he wasn't scared. The ranch hand they'd kept on, old Hector, had already asked twice if he should start looking for other work. Sable went back inside. She picked the paper up again. She thought about what it would mean to say no. She thought about it for 2 more days. Then she drove herself to Harwick and told Mr. Tully to arrange the meeting. Corwin Shale's property was larger than she'd expected, which was saying something because she'd expected it to be large. The gate had his brand on it, a stylized creek, 2 lines crossing, and the road in was gravel, well-maintained, cleared of snow. She noticed that. Someone had been out clearing it recently, which meant it was kept up, which meant the operation was real and not borrowed against. She noticed a lot of things on the drive-in. She noticed because noticing was the only thing that felt like control. He met her on the porch. He was taller than she'd built him in her mind, which was something she hadn't prepared for. Dark coat, no hat, dark hair going a little gray at the temples. He looked like a man who had been outside for most of his life. He did not look like what she had been bracing for, which was something oily, something pleased with itself. He looked mostly like a man who was tired. "Miss Drummond," he said. "Mr. Shale," she said. He held the door. She walked through it. They sat across from each other at a long kitchen table. There was coffee already made, and he poured it without asking, which she might have been annoyed by under other circumstances. She was not under these circumstances because she was too busy watching his hands, his eyes, the way he sat, forward, not back, the way he said nothing while she looked at him, did not rush her. "I have questions," she said. "I assumed you would." "Why?" He set his cup down. "Why the North acreage, or why this arrangement?" "Both." He answered the acreage question first. It was what she'd expected. The creek access, the grazing land, the way it fit with his existing fencing. Practical. She could follow the logic even if she didn't like it. Then he said, "I'm not going to tell you the arrangement is ordinary, because it isn't. What I can tell you is that I have no interest in making your life difficult. I need someone who can run a household. I have 3 men and a cook who is leaving in the spring and a property that needs more management than I can give it, while also working the cattle. That's the truth of it." She looked at him for a moment. "That's not a very romantic reason to get married." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." "And if I agree," she said, "what exactly am I agreeing to?" He was quiet for a moment, and she noticed that he seemed to take the question seriously, didn't dismiss it, didn't look away. You would have your own room, he said. You could bring your mother here if her health requires it. Your brother could finish school in Harwick. I'm not asking for something you're not willing to give, Miss Drummond. I'm asking for a wife in the practical sense of the word. And in the other sense? In the other sense, he said slowly, I'd hope that would be something that came to exist on its own terms, not something demanded. She looked at him a long time. He looked back. He didn't flinch, didn't soften it into something nicer than it was. That, more than anything, was what made her take the paper from her coat pocket and unfold it on the table between them. I'll need a week to get my mother settled, she said, and I want it in writing that the North Acreage title transfers to my family free and clear, regardless of what happens to this arrangement later. He picked up the paper. I'll have it drawn up today. She nodded once. She stood. She picked up the coffee cup she hadn't finished, drank the last of it, and set it down. Then I'll see you in a week, Mr. Shale, she said. She did not let herself feel anything about it until she was back in her truck and 2 miles down the road. Then she pulled over and sat there for a while, with her hands on the wheel and the heater running and the snow coming down, and she felt all of it at once, the grief, the absurdity, the fear that she'd just made the worst decision of her life. The smaller, quieter fear underneath that one, which was that she hadn't. She moved in on a Friday. Hector helped her with the boxes, and Finn carried the heavy ones. And Ida sat in the back seat of the truck, looking out the window at the Shale Creek land like she was reading something written in the fields. Corwin Shale came out to help without being asked, and took boxes from Finn without making a point of it, and showed Ida to the room at the end of the hall, which was the warmest room, which Sable noticed. She didn't say anything about it that night. That first week she moved through the house like she was still a guest in it. She cooked because she was used to cooking, and because the alternative was not cooking, and having nothing to do with her hands, which felt worse. She cleaned the kitchen the way she cleaned things, thoroughly, without ceremony. She found a system for the pantry that made more sense than the one that existed and reorganized it without announcing this to anyone. On the third morning, Corwin came in from the barn earlier than usual and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the pantry wall for a moment. Different, he said. It's better, she said. He poured himself coffee. I'm not arguing. There were 3 ranch hands, a young man named Burke who talked too much, an older hand named Sutter who talked not at all, and a man in his 40s named Pete Yarrow who had been with Corwin for 11 years and who watched Sable the first few days with the careful eyes of a man deciding whether to trust something new. She cooked for all of them, and after the second day Yarrow started saying thank you, which Burke told her was significant. He never says that, Burke said. I heard that, Yarrow said from across the room. Finn came out on weekends and helped with whatever Corwin pointed him toward. And Corwin pointed him toward things that were useful without being condescending about it. Fence repair, feed calculations, the right way to read the weather off the northern ridge. Sable watched this through the kitchen window one afternoon without meaning to, and then felt strange about having watched it, and went back to what she was doing. Ida had a good week, and then a harder one. The doctor from Harwick came out and adjusted her medication and said the room was good, the air was good, the rest was what she needed. He said this to Sable privately in the hallway, and she nodded and thanked him, and after he left, she stood at the end of that hallway for a minute, with her hands flat against the wall, pressing her palms into the plaster, and breathed. Corwin was coming up the stairs when she turned around. He stopped. She said, "She's going to be okay." He said, "I know." She didn't know how he knew. She didn't ask. She went back downstairs and started dinner. The thing about Corwin Shale was that he was not what she had made him in her mind, and the more time she spent in his house, the more she had to keep revising. She had expected indifference. He was not indifferent. He was contained. There was a difference. He did not talk about himself, and he did not ask her many questions, but she noticed that he listened when she spoke, fully, without looking elsewhere. He did not interrupt. He carried her dishes to the sink when he finished his own, which was so small a thing it almost embarrassed her to notice it. He had a library. She discovered this by accident. A door she'd taken for a closet that opened instead onto a room lined with shelves, a worn chair by the window, a lamp on the side table with a book face down on it. She almost closed the door. Then she looked at the spine. She had read that book. She had read it twice. She didn't say anything to him about it for 3 days. Then she said, "At dinner, you're reading Ferris." He looked up. "I am. I didn't expect that. What did you expect? She thought about how to answer that honestly. I didn't expect much of anything specific, she said. I just didn't expect Ferris. He looked at her for a moment. What are you reading? Nothing right now, she said. I didn't bring much. The next morning there were 2 books on the kitchen table. He was already gone to the barn. She stood there looking at them for a moment. 2 different authors, both of which she'd wanted to read, neither of which she'd mentioned, and then she picked them up and took them to her room. She did not think about what that meant. She just thought about it a lot. The trouble started in March. She had known, in a vague way, that not everyone in the county would see the arrangement charitably. She had not known how specifically and personally some of them would take it. The woman who ran the feed store in Harwick, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Ord, had made a comment in January when Sable came in for the first time as Mrs. Shale. A comment under her breath, to the woman next to her, that Sable had heard anyway. She had let it go. She could not let go of what happened at the spring community meeting in Millhaven. It was a planning meeting for the county water rights negotiations, which mattered a great deal to everyone along Shale Creek, and also to her family's north acreage, and so she went. Corwin was supposed to come, but one of the heifers had gotten into wire, and he was staying with her, so Sable went alone. She knew no one there well. She sat in the 3rd row and listened, and when the water rights portion came up she had something to say about the north acreage drainage issue that was accurate and relevant, and she said it, clearly. A man in the back, she didn't know him, heavyset, a ranch further east, said, I didn't know Shale sent his wife to do his talking. There was an uncomfortable silence. She turned in her seat and looked at him. She said, Mr. Shale's wife is telling you that the drainage easement on the eastern line of the Drummond property has not been remapped since 1987, and that any water rights negotiation that ignores, that is going to create problems for 3 downstream operations, including yours. I can explain the survey discrepancy if you'd like, or we can move on. The silence this time was different. She turned back around. She stayed for the rest of the meeting and answered 2 more questions from other ranchers who came to her directly, both of them politely, and when she drove home, she was fine until she wasn't. Until she was in the driveway with the engine off, and the dark all around, and the cold seeping in, and then her hands were shaking slightly on the wheel. She went inside. The kitchen light was on. Corwin was at the table with coffee and the survey maps he'd left that morning. He looked up. She said, The meeting went fine. He said, You're shaking. I'm cold. He got up and poured her coffee and put it in her hands, and she held it, and he stood there, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and didn't say anything, just waited. She said, after a while, there was a man who was rude. Corwin said, Which one? She told him. He listened. He said nothing editorial about it, which she was grateful for, because she didn't need to be told she'd handled it well, and she didn't need it characterized as an outrage on her behalf. He just listened, and then he said, He's had problems with that easement before. He knows you're right. She nodded. She drank her coffee. He sat back down at the maps. She sat down too, across from him, and pulled the one for the east line toward her. They worked until midnight. She didn't notice the time passing. In April, Ida had a bad week. The doctor came twice. Finn drove out on a Tuesday, which meant missing school, and Sable told him he had to go back, and he argued, and she didn't have the patience for it, and they said things to each other that were too sharp, and he left without them being fully resolved. She did not sleep that night. In the morning, she was at the kitchen table at 5, with bad coffee she'd made badly, and the weight of it sitting on her chest. Her mother, her brother, the conversation she should have handled differently. The feeling that she was managing so many separate things from a distance, and the distance kept increasing. Corwin came in from the morning check. He looked at her. He did not ask what was wrong. He sat down across from her, poured the bad coffee into his cup, and drank it without comment. She said, I had a fight with Finn. He'll be back Sunday, I know. He said, You can't protect him from all of it. She looked up. He needs to be able to feel how hard it is, Corwin said, or he won't learn how to carry it. She thought about that for a long time. She thought about her father's boots by the door. About how she'd moved them, finally, on the day she'd left for Shale Creek, put them in the barn, in the back, where they would be useful eventually to someone. She said, Did someone teach you that? He was quiet for a moment, then he said, The hard way. She didn't ask what that meant. She thought she understood it anyway. Finn came on Sunday. She met him at the truck, and he said he was sorry. And she said she was sorry, and they stood there in the cold for a moment, and then she told him to come inside because she'd made biscuits. He ate 4 of them and asked Corwin 3 questions about the spring calving, and left that afternoon looking more like himself. Sable watched his truck go down the gravel road. Corwin was standing next to her. She said, "Thank you." He said, "For what?" She didn't answer that, because she wasn't sure she could get it all into a single sentence. For the room at the end of the hall, for the books on the table, for the coffee she hadn't asked for last Sunday when he'd driven Ida to her appointment without being asked, and waited 2 hours without complaining, and brought her back with a small bag of hard candies she liked. She said, "For this. For how you've done this." He looked at the road where Finn's truck had been. He said quietly, "You've done most of it." She didn't argue, but she didn't think he was right. The water rights case came to a head in May. There was a man named Devlin Rourke who owned the property directly north of Shale Creek. Not working land, investment land, the kind bought by people who had money elsewhere and wanted somewhere to put it. And Rourke had filed a counterclaim on the creek access that, if it succeeded, would affect not just Corwin's operation but 4 other properties along the line, including the north acreage that now belonged free and clear to the Drummond family. The county attorney's office sent a notice. Corwin read it at dinner and set it down and said nothing for a moment. Sable picked it up and read it. She said, "This is wrong. Yes. The 1987 survey. I know. Does your attorney have the original?" He looked at her. "Which one?" "The handwritten one, from the original Shale Creek deed. My father had a copy because the north acreage shares the eastern boundary. He kept it in the safe box." A pause. "That survey predates Rourke's claim by 40 years. By 43 years, she said. It also has the creek access marked as permanent and non-negotiable, which is different language than the 1987 remapping used." He was looking at her the way he sometimes did, not like she'd surprised him exactly, but like he was reassessing something. "Where is the safe box?" he said. "I'll get it," she said. She drove out to the Drummond place the next morning and came back with the box and the document inside it and laid it on the table between them. His attorney came out that afternoon. There were 2 hours of conversation she was part of, which she hadn't expected. She'd assumed they'd send her out of the room, the way these things sometimes went. They didn't. When she made a point about the easement language, the attorney wrote it down. The counterclaim was withdrawn 6 weeks later. She heard about it from Corwin, who told her at dinner the same way he told her most things, plainly, without theatrics. She said good. He said yes. They ate the rest of the meal, and then she did the dishes, and he dried them, which had become a habit without either of them establishing it as one. And somewhere in the middle of the drying she started to laugh. Not loudly, just it came up on her unexpectedly, the absurdity of all of it, the 6 months, the lean, the boots by the door, the survey from 1944, in her dead's just saved the creek. He looked at her. He said, "What?" She said, "I'm just thinking about Mr. Tully's coat." There was a pause. Then he said, "It was very clean." She laughed again. And after a moment he smiled. Not a large smile, not a performance of one, just something that changed the lines of his face, and she saw it and thought, there it is. That's what it looks like. She woke up one morning in June and realized she wasn't afraid of him. She lay there for a while and held that thought, turned it over. She tried to remember when the change had happened and couldn't locate it exactly. It hadn't been one moment. It had been the coffee in the dark, the books on the table, the way he'd listened at the community meeting without making it about himself, the way he'd said the hard way, and she'd understood without explanation. She got up and dressed and went downstairs. He was already at the table with the week's work list. She poured coffee and sat down across from him. She said, "I want to talk about the spring herd rotation." He looked up. "All right. I think we're using the south pasture too early. The grass isn't where it needs to be, and we'll thin it out by August. If we hold the herd on the middle section another 3 weeks and rotate north first, the north needs the fence repair finished. I know." Yarrow said by the end of next week. He looked at her. Then he looked at the list. He crossed something off and wrote something else. "All right," he said. She drank her coffee. He went back to the list. Outside, the morning was coming in through the kitchen window, pale and clean, the fields greening up after a long winter. She thought about her father's boots, about how she'd put them in the barn where they'd be useful, about how usefulness was its own kind of continuance. She said, "I'm going to call Finn about the summer." "The fence work," Corwin said, without looking up. "He'll want to be here for the calving anyway." "I know," he said. "I was thinking the same thing." She looked at him, this quiet and particular man who had turned her life into something she hadn't expected, something she was still in the middle of learning the shape of. She thought about what she would have said about this 6 months ago, in the cold in the driveway with her hands shaking, and what she could say about it now. Not everything. Not yet. There was still distance to close, and she didn't think it needed to be rushed. But she thought about how he'd poured the bad coffee and sat with her without making it a conversation, how he had a library she hadn't known about, how he carried what was heavy without announcing the weight. "Corwin," she said. He looked up. She said, "I think this is going to work." He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his face, not surprise, something older than surprise, something that had been waiting, quietly, to be confirmed. "I think so too," he said. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the fields, at the fences running clean lines through the green, at the creek in the distance catching the morning light like it always had, long before either of them had arrived to have opinions about who it belonged to. The cattle were moving in the south pasture, the same cattle they'd always been.